If you look at the altar, if you listen to what Carol said this morning to the children, we're talking about clothes this morning. Okay, how important are clothes to you? Quite seriously, I mean that, how important? Like, are you one that just loves nothing better than to go out and get a new pair of shoes or a new shirt? Or would you just as soon slip into worn, faded shorts and enjoy a drink beside the pool? I guess there's a little bit of latitude between those two. But we do hear a lot about clothes in this culture, at least from time to time in certain settings. Dress for success, we're told. Clothes define you. Dress for the job you want, not the job you have. What you wear is who you are. Okay, confession time. I do not like shopping for clothes at all. So before we traveled to Canada a few weeks ago, I thought, I'm going to ask my sister to go shopping with me. And she said, yep, I know this great store, wonderful selection, good prices, nothing can go wrong. Well, guess what? I came away with nothing again. And so gracious as she was, she said, listen, I'm just going to look at my closet a little bit. And she just flipped through and said, okay, I never wear that. Do you want it? I tried it on. I said, I love that. So that's one way to deal with that. But something that I find interesting, that in this discussion about the appropriateness of clothing, or whether it's new or not, whether it's stylish or not, this discussion is confined largely to countries that have a lot, like us. Same thing as when you ask someone what food they like. In some countries, in some parts of the world, appropriate clothing is simply available and functional, kind of like a sturdy chair or reliable transportation. So appropriate clothing needs to fit the environment. Clothing is different based on where it's worn. The rainforest or the tropics, the sandy beach, rugged mountains, the extremes of the deserts, the winds of the plain, the tundra of the Arctic. But we need to know our environment. So I'm going to take a bit of a risk this morning. I'm going to talk about clothing that's necessary for cold climates. And yes, I know that our temperatures outside are still high every day, and I will give myself away as being one who has knowledge of cold climates. But who knows, it might serve to lower your temperature just a bit this morning. I deliberately chose to focus on cold climates because I feel that our current social environment is simply hostile, at least elements of it. It seems there are a lot of cold hearts, cold calculations, cold and calloused decisions, and they dominate the national narrative. Not without exception, mind you, and I promise you we will get to the exceptions before our time together is over. So how do we not only survive, but thrive in hostile environments? It is all about the clothing that we choose. So this Ephesians text, which Vicki and Roger read for us, encourages us to put on various pieces of armor, and I loosely interpret that as clothing. Put on the whole armor of God so that, and there comes our why, so that we can stand firm against the schemes of the devil. Okay, we use so that's in our language all the time. Put that jacket on so that you'll be comfortable after the sun sets, or put those boots on because you know there's heavy rains predicted. Put on the full armor of God so that you can stand. But why do we need to stand? The Apostle Paul explains we need to have this protective gear on and stand firm because our battle ultimately is not against human forces, but against the sovereignties and cosmic powers that rule the world of darkness and the spiritual forces in heavenly places. Maybe Paul's original readers were more used to that language, because we don't hear that very much anymore, except possibly in some movies. When this text is quoted, it is often confined to a merely personal or pietistic interpretation, and it sounds something like this. Fight against Satan who's after your soul. Beware of the schemes of the devil which come against your personal purity and goodness, and this is usually interpreted as sexual temptation. Don't be tricked by the schemes that want to lead you astray, that is, the false doctrine that is said to abound. So possibly this is also where our more boisterous responses against evil come from. It's referred to as spiritual warfare. Now, without negating any of these interpretations, I just want to suggest that there may be a more comprehensive way of understanding this all-pervasive force. We certainly are surrounded by evil. We're confronted with it. We're seduced into participating with it. In his book, Evil and the Justice of God, N.T. Wright says that we tend to make 3 mistakes when we try to understand evil. The first mistake is that we ignore it until it boldly comes and slaps us broadside. Second mistake we make is we're surprised when we're confronted with evil and it has some kind of a damaging impact on us. And third mistake, we haven't learned mature ways to understand it, to handle it. And so we opt for reckless responses. Evil, the sovereignties, the cosmic powers have a face. Many times these faces are those that we recognize or we hear about or read about. It's the face of one person who's been entrusted with power, mistreating someone with less power, or mistreating an animal, just because they can. It's the face of a collective decision to keep children behind chain link fences in a foreign country, far away from their loved ones, surrounded by a language they don't know. It's the scowling face of derision, calling other human beings thugs, illegals, dogs. It's the hardened face of a lobbyist who cares only about profit margins. It's the face of entitlement, making no effort to find ways of helping someone in a desperate situation. These scenarios have one commonality. They are fueled by cosmic powers and spiritual forces of darkness. We can't avoid them, but we can opt a functional dress code for safety, so as not to be chilled, not to be hardened or frozen over, thereby co-opted by them. Friends, we need to stay warm. Warm in our spirit, warm in our demeanor, our attitudes, our speech, warm in our love towards one another. Remember, our enemies are not other people, because our enemies are much bigger than that. That's a quote from Reverend Jenny McDevitt, pastor of Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church in New York City. But coming back to our analogy, how do we warm ourselves in a physically cold environment? If you've never spent any significant amount of time in one, here are just a couple of examples. You blow on your hands. You stomp your feet. You rub any exposed skin. Usually just the face is showing when you're in a really cold climate. But all of this stimulates circulation, which in turn produces heat. We also need to know how long we can be outside before we need to come in, and where we can find shelter from wind, frigid temperatures, and precipitation. So possibly the most obvious consideration is what kind of clothing you'll choose. A coat for a Fresno winter is far different from clothing needed for a Northern Canadian winter. So how does this translate into our spiritual, social, and political environment? What can be compared to this blowing on hands? It's what warms us. Okay? It's what brings us relief when we're exposed to those harsh elements. Maybe it's those stories of random acts of kindness. I'm reminded of 2 sprinters in the 2016 Special Olympics in Rio. When one of them tripped and fell, another competitor helped her up, and then returned the favor before the race was over so that they could cross the finish line together. Okay, that warms my heart. I don't know about you. But then I also read something about women in New Zealand recently. They were so excited that their prime minister was pregnant, they decided to make clothes. Oh, not for her baby, for foster children, and for the dementia patients, even for earthquake victims. Okay, those are simple stories. But you know, it is the simple things, one after the other, over and over, that are life-changing. They're ordinary, but they change everything. So how do we stomp our feet and increase our blood flow? Well, let me ask you this. How do you increase your mental and your spiritual circulation? Is it meditation? Is it prayer? Is it running, reading, any of those things? For me, it's reading, prayer, and writing poetry. Take time regularly to assess how cold you're getting or how warm you're managing to stay in this hostile environment. It's always important then to engage in those circulation stimulating activities so that we can stay warm and survive. Now, rubbing exposed skin like we do in sub-freezing temperatures is like looking at where you are really vulnerable. Frostbite is no picnic, let me tell you. So where is your vulnerability in this hostile climate? Does watching or reading the news lower your spiritual and emotional temperature to dangerous lows? How about social media? Or is it a sense of hopelessness because there's so much need around us? Look for one way to rub that exposed skin, to increase that circulation intentionally. Here are a couple of ideas. Limit what you allow into your mind and soul. We cannot stay warm if we're overexposed to hostile elements. Find a way to show love to someone, even if it's someone who you don't think deserves it. Participate in a community mission that is making a difference right now. That could be involvement with the refugee family our congregation is establishing contact with. Visit someone who can't get to services. Give them a call, send them a card, just to let them know that we're thinking about them. Again, it's simple, but it's the simple things that change the atmosphere. In the past weeks, I really caught myself going down that cold road, allowing circumstances to impact and chill me. So I had to catch myself up short and say, listen, there are some things you can change and there are some you can't. And so you have to find ways to nurture and nourish yourself so that you can do what you can do and what you are called to do. Knowing how we respond to our stimuli is key. And then there's that critical element of being appropriately dressed. This is the heart of the text, actually. Knowing the dress code for safety. The Apostle Paul urges his readers to put on various components of an armor, or appropriate pieces of clothing, if you will. He begins with truth. Truth is the belt around your waist. And in an environment where the president's attorney says truth isn't truth, what can we do? More than ever, we need to search for and ponder truth. This is not as easy as you may think. Truth has become a rare commodity. Know it. Cherish it. Spend time absorbing it like you would precious oil. A belt is a piece of clothing to keep layers together. Truth, the belt, secures various other spiritual elements of our spiritual dress. Justice as your breastplate. Now, in the ancient armor, a breastplate was fastened in place securely to protect the vital organs. So think of justice as warding off inhumanity and callousness, which cause organ failure. And without our organs functioning properly, we die. Shoes for your feet, ready to carry the gospel of peace. Shoes are our footing. Choose peace as your footing, even when retaliation is the default. EJ helped us think about that last week. Peace in our personal lives, within ourselves. Peace between ourselves and our families, in our body of believers and in our community. And peace beyond ourselves in the world. Striving for peace is an effort, but it is an effort worth taking. Hold faith up as a shield. A movable shield was also a part of this battle outfit. Faith, the certainty of what is hoped for and not yet seen, is actually a defensive shield. It has protecting qualities. The helmet of salvation comes next. We've been given God's salvation to protect our minds. Now that's not something that's easily understood or explained. It's simply one of those truths to ponder and let sink in. God has offered us salvation so that we can have a sound, renewed, transformed mind. And then carry the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. This is an acknowledgement that Scripture has a power much greater than the words of poetry and prophecy and prose that we read. Pondering and meditating on Scripture is important to be able to incorporate all of the others. And there's one more component, a final appeal in the text. It's what makes everything else effective. It's the base layer, if you will. Now, to stay warm in a cold environment, the base layer, or that which is next to your skin, is critically important. It could be silk or thermal underwear. It could be wool socks or mitts or gloves or scarves or caps, something like that. Did you know that you can actually buy high-tech, battery-heated base layer clothing? I've never needed that for any outside excursions I've been on, and chances are you haven't either. But yep, that is a thing. You can get that. Both your core and your extremities need to be warmed in order to survive in a hostile environment without frostbite. And the base layer of spiritual clothing is prayer. It makes outer layers we've talked about so much more effective. Our text says 4 things about prayer. It says, always pray. Yeah, how's that possible? Well, prayer isn't only the words we say or the rituals we participate in when we come together as a community. It's also being, resting, the music of our soul, a flow along with the Spirit of God. I'm reminded how it's talked about in Acts 17. In God we live, we move, we have our being. That's prayer. Secondly, pray constantly and attentively for all of God's people. Prayer for each other unites. It invites God's grace and it ignites new hope. That's why we offer various avenues for prayer every week. It's offering access to this base layer. I found it so healing to be able to reach out for prayer for my sister who's ill, and Robin mentioned her earlier. So now that I know that you are praying with me for her, is comforting. It gives me hope. It gives me courage to keep praying. So I just want to say thank you for that. And Paul says, pray also for me. This gives us a glimpse into the need for praying for our spiritual leaders, our faith leaders. Even a spiritual giant like this ancient writer requested prayer. In a few weeks, we'll celebrate Kickoff Sunday here at the church. We'll be encouraged to support and pray for our pastoral staff, our musicians, our teachers, our administrative staff, all who lead, all who participate, everyone is necessary and needed, and we need to support each other in prayer. But let's not wait for just one Sunday on the calendar, okay? Let's just do this on a weekly basis. It's just to remind us. And lastly, pray for courage. This is a relevant prayer because courage begins to flag when it's cold. That's true in a hostile, cold environment physically. It's true if we feel we're in a hostile environment personally. We lose feeling in our extremities when we're in the cold. When we stand still, we succumb to the cold. We become lethargic, we become sleepy, and that's literally the case if you're in a very cold place and don't have shelter. So lying down or going to sleep is deadly. Avoid it at all costs. Movement, huddling together, moving, keeping on, that's critical. But it takes courage, resolve, one decision, one step after another. So prayer is the base spiritual clothing layer. Interesting. It's not activism, though that's critically important. It's prayer. It's not a sound theology, even though that's desperately needed. It's prayer. It's not inspiring preaching and life-changing interactions, and we certainly are renewed by those, but it's prayer. When we know what the appropriate dress code is, we'll learn to navigate our environment with what may at first seem like a very clumsy outfit. But there is safety in having a comprehensive understanding of what our environment is and then dressing accordingly. This will enable us to change the face of evil that we see around us, to disarm the sovereignties and the cosmic powers and replace them with grace. One word, one interaction, one action at a time. Then we see other faces, which we also recognize. It's the face of one person who leverages their position to help others. And I'm reminded of people like the former President Jimmy Carter. It's the face of an educational institution which offers a place to a child who has faced discrimination. It's a face with a warm smile and a thank you, embracing those who are so often taken for granted. Think about salespeople in the stores or wait staff in restaurants, or janitorial personnel in public spaces. They serve us. We owe them gratitude. It's the face of a teacher who approaches his or her students as human beings in need of a mentor or a role model. It's the faces of people with public identity, with public integrity, whether they're journalists, politicians, religious leaders, business people, or involved citizens like you and me. I truly believe that we live in a numbingly icy environment. But when we find ways to warm ourselves and warm each other and those around us, transformation begins to happen. In closing and to recap, I would like to encourage all of us to continually seek and ponder truth, resolve to live justly, choose peace, trust faith's protecting qualities, embrace God's salvation, acknowledge Scripture's power, and underneath it all, hold prayer close, like a base layer of dress. This is the appropriate clothing that will warm us in our harsh environment. It can't be shopped for. We don't need exorbitant amounts of money for it, but it will cost us everything. The payoff, though, it's invigorating, it is life-changing, and it will begin to melt the ice in and around us. And that is the kind of clothing I can get really excited about. Let's pray together. God of warmth and protection, we ask for strength to appropriate the pieces of clothing you've offered us. Give us wisdom to see our world accurately and to respond in ways that melts